Alrighty. Well, hello and welcome everyone to this Monterey Bay Aquarium special audio presentation for Shark Week 2019. My name is Patrick. I work at the aquarium here in social media, and we're always trying to find new ways of sharing aquarium stories with you folks out there. And this year for Shark Week, we sat down for a half hour with senior research scientist, the shark guy himself here at the aquarium, Dr. Salvador Jorgensen. He's been studying great whites and other sharks all around the world and here at the aquarium for decades now. And we talked to him about what it's like to become that shark scientist he's wanted to be since he was a kid, and also what it takes to come up with the technology to study these amazing animals that are out there far from shore and near the coast, back and forth, when none of that technology is available off of the shelf. And we generally got his opinion about the state of sharks and what we can do to help them out. So without further ado, here's 30 minutes talking sharks with Dr. Sal Jorgensen here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium for Shark Week 2019. Hope you enjoy. All right. Well, good afternoon, Sal. Thanks so much for joining us here for this impromptu podcast of sorts for Shark Week. Happy Shark Week. How's it going in your world?
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be here. Every week is Shark Week for me.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited that everyone else will be focusing on sharks.
Yeah, it's that 1 week out of the year where just everything, like, I know this time with us is nice. There's so many emails, I'm sure, in your inbox trying to get your opinion on different sharky related matters. So thanks for spending the time. Very quickly, just for the folks listening, what is your full title here and who are we speaking to?
So I'm a senior research scientist here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I'm a PhD. I have a degree in marine ecology, and I love sharks, and primarily been working on sharks here at the aquarium.
Right on. And so how many years have you been studying sharks, would you say?
Well, I've been here in this capacity since 2011, and I did I started my graduate degree doing some research on sharks, basically going back, around 2000.
Okay.
So it's been a good close to 20 years.
Wow, like 2 decades there.
My work here focuses on the more grown-up sharks, as it were. Here in Central California, we do a lot of tagging and tracking and population monitoring, but we're also doing a lot of work with the juvenile white sharks that are primarily down in Southern California, although recently we've had a lot of them here in Monterey Bay. So those programs have kind of been two parts to the program, adult white sharks and juvenile white sharks, but I've been involved with both since the beginning, yeah.
Awesome. And so maybe before we talk about those wild white sharks, because there's obviously a lot happening right now, I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are listening that are really curious about how do you become a white shark scientist, because I'm sure that is something that a lot of people want to do. So what does that look like? How did you make your way there?
Well, I just never grew up. I think most kids at some stage are super interested in sharks and also dinosaurs and, outer space. There's a couple key areas that I think all of us to some degree shared a fascination for. And I think I just, opportunities presented along the way, I could keep living that interest or digging deeper into what I found fascinating about sharks. I never really set out to be a shark scientist per se. I studied marine ecology, so I studied sharks and tunas and other fishes, how they interacted, where the areas in the ocean were where you would find lots of different species together. But at some point, this position at the aquarium presented itself because we had this white shark display program, and we built basically a research program around that to understand, not just understand the sharks that came to visit us in our aquarium for a little while, but how they lived in the wild and how their populations were in this age when shark finning and bycatch are a problem for sharks.
Right. So, I mean, that's something when you're a kid, you're learning about the dinosaurs and the sharks and everything. And then as you grow up, you realize that there's problems with the sharks and everything. And it's interesting how you can develop that passion when you're younger, and then you get to an older point, you start realizing that there's a lot of stuff that there's still out there left to know, and maybe some like difficult things to deal with. And so that, what you were just saying, I have this question now. I'm going to see if I can formulate it well. What is it like to be maybe a kid watching Shark Week, or like learning everything you can about sharks, absorbing all that shark information, and then now you're in a stage where you're the one looking out at shark information, and there is no answer to the questions that you're asking. You have to go and find that new information. So like, everything there is to know about sharks, and then, or, you can look into that, and then now you're at the stage of like all these things that we do not know about sharks and trying to figure that out. What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you said really resonated. I think, when I was a kid, looking at the oceans and spending a lot of time in the water, and just being really into that whole world and interested in sharks, we never knew there was any kind of problem. There was never the sense that the ocean was finite in some way, or that sharks would be endangered even.
Right.
It was like, beware of sharks, and now it's sharks beware.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this kind of rude awakening at some point where I realized, it's been a while, but where the thing you love is you're suddenly aware that it's in jeopardy. And so that was kind of my wake up call to focus in on conservation and what I could do to help preserve this beautiful ocean. So I think that's a strong motivator of how I got started. To the other part of your question, I think your average 9 or 10-year-old knows more about sharks than I do, as far as general factoids about sharks.
Yeah,
which is always fun. But I get nervous when they start asking me too many follow-up questions.
Yeah,
because kids can tend to really get into the stats and the factoids that are available, and there's a lot of information out there. So that's always fun.
You got to be scared of those kids with clipboards that have a lot of follow-ups. They're just like, excuse me, Mr. Sal, but
yeah, you said that. Yeah. But now, and then there's this other thing where like one good question, when you uncover something, it can lead to 2 new questions. And so questions can kind of reproduce and get out of control. So, as you learn more and more, you realize how much more there is to learn.
Right.
So I think there's always that. But even today, the white shark is the most studied of all shark species. There are more research articles and more research programs on white sharks than any other shark. But we still don't know very basic stuff like, nobody really has ever observed them mating.
Right.
We don't really know where they have their babies. We just know that the babies appear in these areas. Probably that's where they have them. But after all this observation, we still don't know this kind of stuff. We don't know their exact gestation period, how long they carry the pups before they're born. So despite all the research time that's been spent on this, there's still so many wide open questions.
Right. And you think about how much media there is around sharks. I mean, Shark Week, I've seen white sharks my whole life, like watching it. And there's still these questions that we don't have those answers to. And that leads me to some of those questions that we get about how do you figure out what a shark is doing? Because unlike a whale or a turtle that has to come up and breathe, they're fish. They can be underwater forever. You would never have to see them. So there's a lot of different techniques that you have to do as someone studying this massive animal that lives its whole life underwater. So what are some of those techniques there?
I mean, that's sort of at the crux of, what makes it difficult to study a large animal in the ocean that spends a lot of time in deep water versus studying something on land where you can use GPS collars and you can know exactly where they are at any given second once you've tagged them. The problem we have underwater and in the ocean is that all the radio frequencies don't transmit through salt water. So all the tools that we have that are, Wi-Fi based or Bluetooth or radio transmissions or satellite transmissions, they cannot transmit from under the water surface to up to any kind of receiving device. So basically, we're just cut off. And so what we have to do is kind of use tricks and use the technology that is there in different ways than it was intended to be used to try and get around this problem. And so a lot of the tags, for example, that we use just need to store up all of the measurements that they're making into a memory. And then we can trigger the tag to release at a certain time, have it float to the surface and begin broadcasting some of that data, or at least broadcast a signal to get a GPS coordinates of where the device is currently, so that we can go into the ocean and get the device and get all the memory back. So that's a huge obstacle and a huge challenge. And, there's also not a huge market for the types of technologies that you would use in this situation. Right. So the markets we're borrowing from are the consumer electronics, what's in your iPhone. Can we get some of those components? Can we build something that measures, instead of steps, can it measure tail beats? Those types of things. Can we put in a miniaturized camera and see what the sharks are doing from that perspective? Once we record that data, how are we going to get it back? So we kind of, hack together some of the stuff that's in the market for other purposes to use to study sharks underwater.
Yeah, well, that just got me really excited. If you could figure out a way to have the shark write the tweets for me during Shark Week, because they're way more. They know what's interesting out there.
I bet we could.
Yeah?
Well, if you could write some kind of a translator that says...
Oh, perfect.
Right? So that there's words that describes a certain behavior pattern. For example, we can tell when a shark is jetting to the surface or is exerting a lot of energy. It could write something like, phew, I'm tired.
Right.
All this swimming to the surface, I've done it 20 times in the last... 24 hours,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to get their opinion on, Big Little Lies season finale as well.
That might be tougher.
We're going to avoid Monterey for a little bit. Seems pretty hot out there. Well, yeah, that's, so those tags and everything, we should talk maybe a little bit about this really landmark bit of research that I know I was learning when I was in college, was the sort of discovery of the White Shark Cafe being something that was, you see white sharks along the coast of California, you assume these are coastal species and that's it. And then you put tags on the back of these sharks and you realize, wait, these are transoceanic voyagers that are going out into the middle of this really interesting. So tell us a little bit about that moment of realizing that these are not coastal fish, that they travel really far.
Yeah. So that was one of the big eye openers for us, and sort of like we talked about in the beginning. When you go to answer a question, it raises two more. Putting on satellite pop-up tags on white sharks, we found that they were heading off consistently out into the middle of the ocean, the area halfway between here and Hawaii that we affectionately named the White Shark Cafe. Partly because we didn't know whether they were going out to eat or whether to meet. So a cafe might be somewhere where you would do either of those activities, and so we kept it a little bit ambiguous that way. And this was, this was pretty fascinating. Suddenly, here's a white shark that actually is spending most of its time in total darkness out in the middle of the ocean. They track the light in the water column. So as soon as daybreak comes, the sharks a lot of times are swimming down just deep enough to where the light is not no longer penetrating the ocean water. And at nighttime, they're coming back up. They're not just doing it by themselves. They are tracking a whole biomass of smaller, tiny little shrimp, fish, squid, and larger fish. It's a whole group migration, the largest, group migration on Earth, really, by biomass out in the middle of the ocean.
And those animals, are those the deep scattering layers, what people may have heard about? Yeah.
So I'm referring to the deep scattering layer, which is basically a blanket layer of all of these organisms that I just described, from small to medium to large, and in this case, very large. They're moving up and down with the daylight and night cycle, and they're common throughout the world's oceans. In this particular area, the sharks are going out there. We refer to this area or oceanographers refer to this area as the desert of the Pacific, because from space you can't really see that there's anything going on there. But it turns out at depth, there's this whole blanket of organisms moving up and down. They call it the deep scattering layer because early naval ships, when we first developed sonar, that's an ability to shoot sound down into the water and have it bounce off of either the bottom or any object that it reflects off of. They discovered this blanket of organisms, and it seemed like the bottom of the ocean was coming up at dusk, and it alarmed a few probably admirals in the beginning, but they called it the deep scattering layer because it scatters the sound that they broadcast. So so now we have a white shark down there in that whole food chain, and the white shark turns out has an eye that is adapted to low light conditions and high light conditions. Usually organisms have their eyes, for one or the other. Our eyes are adapted to high light,
right?
And they have the ability to do both, so they can exist in near darkness, continually.
Yeah, it's one of those things about white sharks. So they're a deep sea animal for a lot of their life. They're along the coast when we see them. So they have these dual personalities and adaptations that we're still trying to figure out. Well, so like what is going on with these animals, especially if they're a deep sea predator and they're a coastal predator. They're crucial animals for multiple different, what we would consider separate ecosystems, but they're clearly a link between those two.
Yeah, that's right. They basically have two lives, and this one is sort of a hidden life. To them, it's probably all just one life, but to us, It just seems like it neatly divides into here's their coastal thing. We're eating seals. We're filling up our livers with this reserve of energy, and now we're going to tap into that energy. We're going to swim offshore to this cafe. Mm-hmm. We're going to do whatever we do out there, and we're going to track this deep scattering layer, and so that seems like a whole different life. Yeah,
well, it must be interesting if any of them recognized you as well, or like that you were around on the boat. It's like, the land apes that are in California are up. They're sending one of their robots down, like.
Yeah, well, I think they're probably more perceptive than we give them credit for. I mean, we see the same shark year after year.
Yeah.
Let's see. Mr. Burns is one shark that we see every single year for the last, 12, 13 years.
Uh-huh.
Some sharks like Tom Johnson, we've seen on and off for, if we go back to the 80s when Scott Anderson was doing research there, and you count that, now we're going on 24 years. We haven't seen him for a couple of years. But, if we see them every year in our research boat, they see us every year. And guess what? We've got that decoy out there, and they continually swim up to that thing and go, oh, again, it's not a seal. So they probably do recognize us, I bet. I mean, you got to understand, this is a large animal swimming around the same spot day after day for months at the Farallon Islands, for example, looking for that chance to get a seal. And so they're seeing the same rocks. They're seeing the same, they have this little circuit. They see the same stuff. And there's no doubt in my mind that when they hear our research vessel, or if they see that decoy, once they get up close and they realize they've been duped again, they must know that this is the same non-food that I tried to get last year.
I love the idea of like older white sharks ribbing the young ones, just like, you should go take a look at that seal. I'm sure it's really in trouble. It's like, oh, really? You sure? They go up like, it was a fake one. Like, yep. Now you're part of the research.
I'll give you a head start.
Yeah. So that leads to another question. So outside of the White Shark Cafe and everything, you were mentioning GPS following these animals around. So you actually have to sort of be this this satellite following the white sharks around. So you just recently got back from the Galapagos. You were in South Africa. You go to the Farallones. What's it like for you to travel around in the ocean and kind of see these different areas that have sharks as a crucial component to them and studying them? You're moving around a lot. What's it like to follow these sharks around the world?
Well, I mean, it's exciting. It's fun. I mean, when we look at white sharks here and we can compare them to how they exist and what they do in South Africa, where things are a little bit different. Yeah, we always learn something because now you have this comparison that you can make. And so you can say, well, why do they do this here and something different elsewhere? But I mean, sharks have been around in some form or another on this earth for nearly 500 million years. It's a huge amount of time. Mm-hmm. Over that time, there have existed many different species of sharks, and they've been highly successful in basically any ecosystem that you can name in the ocean. So everywhere you go, even if you're in the poles, in frigid water, there are sharks there. You've got the salmon shark, you've got the Greenland shark. They can be in ice cold water, really. Mm-hmm. And in the tropics, you have other species. In the intertidal, there's some species that live, between the tides. So basically, anywhere you go in the ocean, there's a predator, and it's a shark. So, I mean, going around the world and seeing the different sharks and their different ecosystems is really, gives you a sense of that. Now, some cool stuff that we found, South Africa. Yeah. We were putting on camera tags. We use camera tags here. We attach a forward-facing camera with a temporary clip that clips onto the dorsal fin, and we are able to get a perspective view, a shark perspective view of what the shark's seeing when they move through their environment, what they chase, what they turn away, what they avoid. And when we did this in South Africa, we realized the sharks there are spending all this time moving into the kelp and chasing Cape fur seals inside the kelp. They're playing cat and mouse inside the kelp. It's very different. There's always been this assumption that, the kelp is somewhere where the white sharks don't go. In fact, there's a group who was studying how we could make artificial kelp fronds, kelp forests, and put them around swimming beaches as a deterrent to keep white sharks out. They were doing this in South Africa, and they were actually doing experiments. So right where we were tagging, we could see their experimental design there. And we put on these tags, and we found not just one, but many of the sharks were spending a significant time, brushing through the kelp, looking this way and that, finding seals in there and chasing them around. And the seals would react, and they get some, breaks up their silhouette. They get some visual camouflage from the kelp, but they're having to do things like blow bubbles and do fast maneuvers and stuff to avoid the sharks. Wow. And you can see this on the camera. It's pretty exciting. So we published that work. That was pretty neat. I mean, and it relates to what's happening here in California because we have just, in the last year, we published a study looking at where otters are being accidentally bitten by white sharks along the California coast. I say accidentally because the otters are always spit out by the white sharks. Mm-hmm. White sharks are looking for seals. Seals have blubber. That's what the sharks want, that high-calorie meal. Otters don't insulate by blubber. They insulate by their fur. They have the highest number of hairs per square inch of any mammal, and so they trap air. So when a shark bites an otter, they're not getting a butterball, they're getting a hairball. Right. And they usually spit it out. They always spit it out, it seems like. So we know these are mistaken cases of mistaken identity.
Yeah, it's a tragedy of the shark world that bacon and celery give off the same shadow from below. They're just like, this.
That's right. That's right.
Bite that. And oh, dang it! I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. And the otter's like, I'm highly cuttable, and those are good teeth. Like, I know. Sorry. Just
too late now.
Looking for your neighbor. Sorry.
Everyone is disappointed. Yeah. Especially nobody more than the otter.
Right.
But we found that where there's kelp canopy, the otters are largely safe, and where there's where the otters are roaming into open water, that's where they're getting hit. So there is some precedent for thinking that that the kelp provides the sanctuary for some of these animals. So this was just a really interesting perspective to see them using the kelp canopy in that way.
Right, and so that's something that was filmed off of South Africa. We're not exactly sure how much our Californian white sharks do that. They're separate groups, but I know from my experience as a diver here in Monterey, this year there was everyone says 10, 15, 20-foot white shark, but like there was a white shark that was off of the breakwater here in Monterey that divers saw kind of 3, 4, 5 times when it was good visibility. And every time the shark like swims by, I was like, oh, and then like swims off. And it was just really funny listening in scuba forums. People are like, there was a white shark. It's like, yeah, there's a sea lion rookery at the end of the breakwater wall, and there's halibut there. So if you're a transitional shark, you're excited. So how do you respond? Like, what is it for you when you get that media contact of like, there was a white shark spotted in the ocean somewhere? Tell us, like, what's your reaction to that? Like, how does that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, like, anytime you get in the ocean, there's a shark. I mean, if you don't see it, it's probably going to see you anyways. So just assume that, and then, sort of recalculate your I guess everyone has their internal risk assessment that they go through when they say, hey, do I want to get in a car and drive to the beach? Well, I guess we don't think about the risk of getting into a car and getting on the highway, which probably produces more fatalities by far than people getting in the water to swim in the ocean. But when we get into the ocean, we tend to think about it a little bit more. Perhaps there's less of an idea that we're in control. We're at the driver's, we are the driver here. We're in control because the ocean is bigger than us, and because those teethy, predators are much more maneuverable, and we're in their element. So we don't really have the control. So there's this perception that it must be much more dangerous, but in fact it's not. And we published a study a couple of years ago now where we looked at every shark encounter, every encounter where somebody's been bitten by a shark in California. And we tracked this over the last 50 years. And so, on average, there's between 1 and 2 bites per year in California, usually attributed to white sharks. And that number has gradually creeped up from about 1 per year in the mid-50s to about 1.6 per year currently, or at least at the time of the study. But the number of people that are in the water doing all kinds of activities from surfing, swimming, scuba diving, what have you, has gone way up. So it's a bit like saying, there's a lot more plane crashes than there ever were before. But considering how many people are flying, it's still the safest way to travel anywhere, the safest mode of transport.
Right.
Because there's more happening, but there's more people traveling, and really the risk per person, what we call the risk per capita, has gone down in plane travel. But in shark risk, it's gone down tremendously. In the last 50 years, the risk of being bitten in California has gone down 90%. So it is safer than before. And I think we know a lot more about when and where white sharks are. For example, you pointed out, if you're swimming around a sea lion rookery, that is a good place for sharks to be, because that's where they get their food. So those are the types of places you might want to avoid if you're very concerned about it.
Well, and I think the thing that I've kind of learned, because I'm going diving, I'm surfing and out there, there's a lot of people that are concerned about, when you go diving, are there sharks out there? Do you ever see sharks? That's one of the biggest questions that we'll get. And actually what I have really enjoyed about your research as it's come out is like, yeah, there's sharks out there. They're out there all the time. Right. We know where they are. And that is actually the good news, is that we know that there's sharks out there and the interactions are very minimal. So that tells you that the sharks are, what I like about your research is it shows that the sharks are very diligent. Like they're very, I mean, any Californian Bay Area white shark is going to be a very picky eater anyway. You know, they're just going to the best Yelp spots. Like elephant seal is 5 stars, otter is 1 star. So just that idea of going from Jaws in the media of like these thoughtless predators, you're really casting a light or shining a light on the fact that these are they're very intentional predators along the coast.
And, you know, the way we got there is from the tagging studies. So we've been using tags, pop-up satellite tags that we used to put on their back. And we've been recently, we've been doing this for a while now, feeding those tags to the shark, wrapping them up in a what we call a blubber burrito from salvaged seal blubber that the stranded seals. So we wrap that up and we feed it to the shark, and then the shark retains that tag for on average 5 to 15 days. We had one last 30 days, and then the shark spits back up the hard bits as they do, just like an owl would. And we were able to retrieve those tags back. And so from that record, we can see over this 1 month, how many times was that shark able to ingest a meal? How many chases did it undertake during that time? And what we found, and the cameras do the same thing. So we put the camera tags on the fin, the camera's facing forward. We can see any kind of pursuit. We've seen sharks, like I said, chasing seals in the kelp in South Africa. We've seen them chasing seals here. But in the hours and hours, hundreds of hours of data that we have, they actually are consuming extremely rarely. And so it seems and that they can go and regularly do go weeks, if not a month, between meals. And they are very picky. So when you say picky eater, I mean, they are picky eaters. They're very discretionary about what they go for. They do not want that celery if they can help it. They really they want the burger. They want that fat. So they are extremely picky eaters. They're discerning. The fact that they come to the same place over and over, year after year, means they become very familiar with their environment. If something's new and out of place, that'll stand out from this scenery that they've seen over and over. So there's not a lot of other peripheral stimulus in their visual frame that could distract them. So they I think they're very careful about what they eat, and they eat it very infrequently.
Wow. Yeah, and that's exactly not what you would expect, studying a white shark based on everything that we know.
It's not what we've been told
right.
by, Peter Benchley and in Jaws, and most of the shows that you see on Shark Week actually kind of perpetuate this idea that, like you said, they're this mindless eating machine, just roving the coastline, just biting and swallowing everything in their path. It's absolutely the opposite.
And that's something too that leads into maybe sort of a concluding statement for you of like these animals need protection. And I think there's this interesting duality that people have with these animals, because on the one hand, they're just inherently fascinating. They're these big fish, predators, just they're so awe-inspiring. And then on the other side, they're also, they can make you wary about going in the water. And so there's this fascination and also this fear that comes with it. And then we realize that our coastline, if there's white sharks, that's good. And maybe more is better, or at least maintaining what we have is certainly something that we need to do to maintain everything along the coast. So how would you say we get to that place where we appreciate the white sharks to the point where we want them around now and all the time?
Yeah. Well, I would agree with you. I think the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is do we want an intact wilderness? Do we value things like Yellowstone, where there are grizzlies, where we can, where those animals can exist for their own sake, but also where we can see nature and the whole food chain in with all of its complete parts. The ocean is a bit the same way, and I think California has done a pretty good job in certain regards for managing our ecosystem in such a way that the seals and sea lions have come back from near extinction. So that's a food base for these larger white sharks. We have orcas too. So here, this is a place that is a wilderness. It has its, some of the largest predators on Earth. And so I think the first step is to recognize it for that and to place a value on it. So we like that. That's something we want. If we want to be completely safe, we go to a very protected bay or a beach, or we go to a swimming pool, and we'll probably be a lot safer there. But if you want to put yourself out there and be in that environment and stuff, it is actually much safer than people think. So we can coexist with these predators. One thing I like to point out is that in California, our white sharks are concentrated right at the doorsteps of the two most populated areas. So the adult sharks are right out at the outside of the Golden Gate, around San Francisco, the most populated part of the northern central area, and all the pups are, if not born, spend the first months and years of their life right outside of LA, where it's even more populated. So we're already coexisting, and really the number of incidents is really so low. It just gets disproportional amount of attention. So I think we can coexist, and I think we should, and I think we should value the ocean as a place where predators that have been around for hundreds of million years can continue to be around, and we should do everything that's in our power to facilitate that.
Right. We certainly want more Shark Weeks, at least generally, and then for every week to be Shark Week from now into the rest of the life of the planet there.
Absolutely. I love that.
That'd be great. Well, Sal, we could definitely talk to you forever. This is just very fascinating stuff, but I do want to be mindful that you've got that shark science to go and do, and we've been talking together for a while now. So thank you so much for spending time with us, and happy Shark Week 2019 to you, Sal.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been a real pleasure, and I love this stuff. So
all right.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to that conversation there with Sal. Just absolutely fascinating stuff, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to him again very soon about this research out there. Thank you all so much for being a part of the aquarium family, for following us on our different social media feeds. And if you like this, make sure to give us a like, a comment, let us know if you enjoyed this type of thing, and we'll definitely try to bring you more aquarium stories coming very soon. But with that, happy Shark Week 2019 to all of you folks out there. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon at the Monterey Bay Aquarium.